Welcome, dear dreamer, to the Scandalous historian. Tonight, we turn our gaze north, far north. We arrive where the sea foams hard against black volcanic rock, where wind howls over endless snowdrifts and the dark comes early. You've arrived in Iceland. But not the Iceland of travel brochures and green summer meadows. This is Viking Iceland, sparse, raw, and utterly unforgiving. And for the next few hours, we will move slowly through this world, not through its wars and conquests, but through its quieter truths. The daily hardships, the blood feuds, the poems, the law councils under open sky, and the fire-lit hush of the longhouse as the cold presses in from all sides. But don't worry, we're not here to fight or flee. We are here only to listen and drift. If this journey brings you peace, if you find comfort in these soft explorations of the past, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And in the comments below, share your country's flag. We'd love to see where in the world our fellow dreamers are listening from. Now, close your eyes if you like, and let the centuries pull back like a tide. The wind is the first thing you notice. It's not gentle, not playful. It is constant, broad, bracing, and sharp like a blade honed too thin. It slips under wool cloaks and pushes hard against the face. It carries with it the briny scent of the sea and the subtle reek of fish left too long on drying racks. And even on days when the sky opens briefly, when the sun, pale and distant, hangs low over the horizon, the wind never rests. This is Iceland in the Viking Age. Somewhere around the year 930, a young island, geologically speaking, volcanic, rugged, unsmoothed by time, settled by Norse outcasts, second sons and dreamers too proud to bend the knee in Norway. It is not a place for the unprepared, and it is certainly not a place to arrive without knowledge of what the land demands. Imagine yourself waking just before dawn. Not in a city, not even in a village, but in a turf house, one of perhaps 4 or 5 scattered structures hugging the base of a windswept hill. There are no chimneys, no windows, just a single heavy wooden door, sealed with wool-stuffed cloth to keep out the cold. Inside, the air is thick, warm, yes, but cloying, saturated with smoke from last night's fire, now just embers. The scent of charred peat and wet wool hangs low in the room. Your chest tightens when you breathe too deeply. You are wrapped in layers, sheepskin, coarse wool, fur stitched together from whatever could be trapped in the nearby valley. The floor beneath you is hard-packed earth, covered in straw. It crunches softly as you shift, careful not to disturb the sleepers beside you, because you do not sleep alone here, not in Iceland, not in winter. The family sleeps together in the main room, husband, wife, children, the elderly, even a few animals if the night was too cold for the barn to keep the frost out. There is no privacy. There is only survival. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim light. Someone has already stirred. A girl, perhaps 13 or 14, leans over the fire pit, coaxing life back into the coals. She breathes softly into the embers, then adds dried moss, whispering a chant under her breath. The rhythm of the words is comforting, repetitive. She's done this every morning since she could walk. The flame catches, a small victory. She adds peat and a few thin sticks, then steps back. Smoke rises, not in a tidy column, but lazily, curling along the low ceiling, before finding its way through a small smoke hole in the turf roof, and already, the smell of something familiar fills the room. dried fish. Torn into strips, soaking in water, laid over the fire to soften. Breakfast is not a feast. It is nourishment. Nothing more. You chew slowly. The texture is rubbery. The flavor strong and salty. There's sour milk in a horn cup, skyr. Thick and tangy, spooned out with a carved wooden scoop. Grain, if you're lucky. But grain doesn't grow well here. Barley struggles in this soil, and most of it is saved for brewing or feeding livestock. The goal of the morning meal is simple. Prepare the body for the work ahead. And that work is constant. You step outside and the cold bites at your skin. Even covered, the exposed parts of your body, nose, ears, the space between sleeve and glove, sting with the force of it. The world is pale and raw. Grasses lie flattened beneath last week's frost. The sky is a flat sheet of gray, and in the distance, the sea moans against the rocks like something ancient and tired. There are no roads, just foot-worn paths between homesteads, the mud frozen hard enough to walk across without sinking. You head toward the shore. You pass drying racks, wooden frames hung with rows of fish split open and stiffened by cold air. Cod, mostly. Maybe some haddock. The smell is strong, sour, and deeply familiar. This is the foundation of your diet. Not because it is favored, but because it is reliable. Salted, dried, and stored in bundles, fish lasts through winter. It feeds children, elders, and warriors alike. Without it, the land would win. There are chores to be done, and they are not glamorous. You help pull frozen peat from the ground, the blocks heavy and damp, stacked carefully for burning. You check the animals. Thin sheep with frost on their backs, clustered together for warmth. The cows must be milked, but their yield is poor in winter. Their breath steams in the air. They shift restlessly as you approach, hooves crunching ice. A horse neighs from the shed, stamping the earth. It's restless, longing to run, but there's nowhere to go. Nothing here is easy. Nothing here is ever truly warm. Midday offers no feast, perhaps a bit more fish. If there's cheese, it's sharp and hard from aging. Bread is rare. Baked goods are a luxury saved for feasts or celebrations. But you do eat together, around the central fire, in silence or in murmured talk about the weather, the animals, the strength of the roof, the dream your aunt had the night before. Dreams matter here. They are signs, warnings, sometimes even instructions. There is no priest to consult, no town hall. You trust your elders, the land, the patterns of wind and bird call, and always the sagas. Stories told aloud, not as entertainment, but as survival. Memory passed through generations like fire from one torch to the next. Night returns early. The sun, pale and weak, sinks below the hills before you've truly registered its presence. Inside the turf house, the fire is built up again. Its smoke curls through the dark, gilding everything with a faint haze. Lamps are lit, animal fat in small bowls, with wicks made of moss. Their flames flicker, but give little light. You gather close. Now, the voice of the oldest among you rises. A saga is told, of feuds, of great journeys, of clever women and cursed blades, of honor and betrayal, and frost giants sleeping beneath the earth. You listen not just with your ears, but with your whole body. Because these stories are not fiction, they are instruction, memory, warning. They tell you how to behave, who to trust, when to hold your tongue, when to seek vengeance. and they remind you of something important. You do not survive here alone. The fire crackles softly. Not loudly, just the quiet pop of wet moss, the slow collapse of peat. Its glow dances against the low timbers of the turf house, casting ripples of amber light across the walls, the rough wool cloaks, the lined faces of those who sit closest. You've settled for the evening, but rest is not so simple. This is not the kind of day that ends in peace. It ends in pause. Outside, the wind has not stopped. It sighs and moans against the seams of the house. It creeps through every gap, stirring the hair at the back of your neck. And you remember, without needing to be told, that the house is not permanent. Not against the cold, not against nature, not against your neighbor. There is no king here. Not in Viking Age Iceland. There are chieftains, Gothar, but they rule by influence, not decree. There is no army to protect you, no city guard, no fortress with high walls. You are protected by kin, by alliances, by reputation, and that means every action matters. A careless insult at the summer gathering, a horse taken too near someone else's grazing pasture, a trade gone poorly, followed by words spoken too freely after ale. These things have consequences, and those consequences can last generations. You recall a story told last season. When the nights first began to stretch, a cousin's cousin Ragnar, son of Einar, had been accused of cutting turf too far into his neighbor's field. The neighbor's sheep starved. Tensions flared. A blow was struck. The next day, Ragnar's barn burned. No one saw who did it. No one ever does. But the feud was rekindled, like embers coaxed into flame. That family hasn't spoken to yours in 3 winters. You avoid each other at the thing, sit apart at feasts. You don't look them in the eye when paths cross in the fishing coves. No law court can settle it, not fully. Only balance. And in Iceland, balance is maintained delicately. These feuds are not like modern disputes. They are not brief. They are not impersonal. They are not forgotten. They pass from father to son, like land or names. They are chronicled in verse, embedded in memory. To know who you are is to know who you've quarreled with. So even here, in the warmth of your own home, among your own kin, you are watchful, not frightened, just aware. This is the rhythm of life in early Iceland, close-knit and cold-edged. Your neighbors may be your friends, or your judges, or your enemies. Sometimes, they are all 3 at once. Tomorrow, if weather allows, a group will walk 2 hours east to a neighboring farm. A meeting, an exchange of sheep, perhaps, or news, or fish. There may be hospitality. There may be silence. There may be gifts given, carefully chosen, modest, but meaningful. A carved comb, a pouch of herbs, a tale from the coast. These gestures keep the balance steady. They remind others of your presence, your usefulness, your awareness. In Iceland, being forgotten is as dangerous as being disliked. You survive not just by strength, but by memory, by keeping your name alive in the minds of others, by making sure your absence would be noticed. And yet, amid all of this care, this edge, this awareness, life goes on. It must. Children are born in this house. They are named according to custom, after ancestors usually, or with names tied to strength or fortune. A girl might be called Guthrun, meaning secret of the gods. A boy, perhaps, Leif, heir or descendant. No priest oversees the birth. There is no church here yet, only the old rites. The naming is whispered by the hearth, and the child is sprinkled with water, accepted, bound to the family, recognized. Later, their ears will be filled with stories, not fables, but sagas. And by the time they can walk steadily, they'll know the names of their kin, the shape of their valley, the history of every feud in their bloodline. To forget is to be rootless, and in Iceland, roots are everything. Imagine the tools you use each day. There are no iron stoves, no factory-made pots. You cook over an open hearth in a hanging cauldron or on flat stones. You use wooden ladles. You wear gloves made from lambskin lined with fur. Needles are bone or bronze. Your clothes are stitched from coarse-spun wool, dyed with whatever roots or lichens you have managed to gather in warmer months. In summer, you might color your tunic with bog bilberry or madder root. But in winter, most things are gray or brown. Not for lack of beauty, but for lack of time. Beauty does exist here, but it's not ostentatious, it's quiet. You see it in the carved line of a comb, the pattern of a woven belt, the curve of a bone needle, softened smooth from use. You see it in the simple elegance of the boat, waiting by the fjord, its prow shaped like the neck of a swan. You see it in the way your father wraps the drinking horn in wool after every feast, so it will not crack in the cold. You see it in silence, preservation, care, patience. There are days when the sky clears, rare ones. The clouds pull back like a blanket folded by invisible hands, and light pours across the land. The snow reflects it with blinding force. The sea glitters like hammered silver. Your breath rises, not as steam but as thin clouds dancing before your lips. On those days, you feel the land's beauty, not as warmth, but as awe. Iceland does not offer comfort. It offers sublimity. You do not walk the hills to relax. You walk them to remember your place, to remember how small you are, and how strong you must be to remain. Evening comes again, as it always does, long and early. The house darkens. The animals are brought in closer. A lamb too young to endure the night is curled in the corner, wrapped in a spare cloak. A child sings softly to it. Not a lullaby, but a saga. One of giants and flame, of icy rivers and brave men swallowed by the earth. And you know the story. You know the cadence. You've heard it 100 times. And still, it soothes. Because it is old. Because it is yours. Because it carries everything you are too tired to hold by yourself. The wind hammers the roof again. The cold presses at the walls. The smoke thickens, curling once more around the beams overhead. And you lie down, not in a bed, but in straw, on hide, wrapped in wool, shoulder to shoulder with those you love, or those you tolerate. There is no difference in the dark. And you fall asleep not to silence, but to the rhythm of breath, the low creak of wood, the sound of the old woman murmuring the ending of a story, even after her audience has drifted away. And above all of it, the wind, calling, endless, unchanging. Morning returns, though it scarcely feels new in the half-light of dawn. The days bleed together, gray on gray, wind over wind. The sky is indistinct. It gives no hint of hour or season, only weather. And weather here is its own force, a daily presence to be negotiated, not predicted. The fire is coaxed back to life again. Always the fire. It is the anchor of the home, the keeper of breath and warmth and light. A child feeds it scraps of dried dung and moss. There is little wood to be found on this island. No great forests, no towering pines. Most timber is driftwood, gifted by the sea, not grown. Outside, the earth is frozen. You hear the brittle crunch of footfalls across the yard. A bucket tips over. A cow snorts in complaint. The smell of frost-bitten hay and human sweat mixes with cold fish and churned milk. Another day. Today someone is ill. Not gravely, but it could worsen. Her cough rattles in the chest. You bring her sour milk, warmed gently, mixed with crushed herbs stored from last summer. Angelica root, mostly. Maybe some thyme, if any survive the drying board. There are no physicians here. Only memory. Only knowledge passed from mother to daughter, whispered in the long nights. Which plants soothe, which reduce fever, which must be avoided in pregnancy. The body is not a mystery. It is a map, a rhythm, a pattern of heat and weakness and pulse. You feel her forehead, too warm. You adjust the furs around her and place a damp cloth at the base of her neck. You do not panic. The sick are watched, not wept for. Not yet. Care is not a luxury. It is a task. Like milking, or mending, or hauling peat. And while someone cares for the ill, someone else feeds the animals, patches a roof tile, scrubs the residue from a pot with sand and snow. And always, someone spins. The sound of the spindle never stops in an Icelandic home. Wool must be carded, teased, spun into yarn, and twisted again. It is not work for the idle. It is constant. Even as you talk, you spin. Even as you listen to stories, you spin. A well-run household is a place where nothing stills unless it must. Today, a visitor arrives. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. He travels alone, leading a pony laden with satchels. He wears a heavy fur mantle, crusted with frost, and his breath rises in clouds as he calls out at the edge of the yard. Your uncle recognizes him, an old friend, come from 2 valleys away. He is let in. His boots are pulled off. His hands are rubbed with snow to warm them gradually. He is given a cup of skyr, a strip of cured lamb, and a place by the fire. Only after he eats does he speak. And only then, slowly. He brings news of another death, not from war, but from exposure. A man caught too long on a ridge during a sudden storm. His horse returned without him, reins dragging in the snow. The body was found 3 days later, frozen, fingers curled. The room falls quiet, not in horror, but in recognition. This is the shape of death here. Not always violence, not always illness, sometimes simply cold, sometimes simply being too far from help, too late to turn back, too proud to ask for shelter. The visitor shakes his head, sips his milk, and tells another story. A birth, this time. A good one. Strong lungs, healthy limbs, a lucky start. Balance is restored. That night, the visitor offers a gift. A verse, spoken from memory. A skald's poem, composed by another man and passed through tongues like water poured from one vessel to the next. It speaks of the gods, of Odin and Freya, of ravens and halls, and the long curve of fate. The words are old, the rhythm familiar. It hums low in the bones. No one interrupts. Even the youngest listen, wide-eyed, fidgeting in silence. And when the verse ends, a log is placed on the fire. Not because it's needed, but because that's what one does after hearing the gods named aloud. You prepare a place for the visitor to sleep. Not a bed. There are no spare beds. Just furs laid out near the warmest corner. He murmurs thanks and curls beneath them, cloak still on. You lie down too, and for a moment the house is still. The cough has eased. The fire has settled. The wind has shifted. You close your eyes, and you dream of green places, of meadows and trees, of rivers without ice. Not because you've seen them, but because someone once described them to you, with the voice of someone who remembered summer as more than just an idea. Tomorrow, the visitor will leave. He will be given dried fish, a new bootstrap, a farewell carved into the bottom of his travel horn, and the house will return to its normal rhythm. But tonight, you are reminded of something delicate and rare, that even here on the edge of the world, wrapped in cold and smoke, there are moments of beauty, of story, of presence. Not loud, not bright, but steady, enduring. The last stretch of night in Viking Iceland is often the longest, not just because of the darkness, though it clings to the land with particular insistence during the winter months, but because the final hours before dawn are the coldest. The fire, banked carefully before bed, has burned low. Its warmth still pulses faintly from the hearthstones, but the air bites now. You wake slowly, curled beneath rough-spun blankets, fur pulled tight against your neck. Your breath fogs in the air. A few embers still glow in the ash. You feed them slivers of dry moss, whispering softly to the flame like an old friend. There is no rush, no sudden bustle, just patience, just routine. This is the rhythm of Iceland. Never rushed, never idle. Waking, surviving, watching the sky. Coral line. Today the weather is clear, not warm, never truly warm, but still and open. You take your work outdoors. There's rope to be twisted from horsehair, and the light, though dim, is enough to see by. Your hands are stiff with cold at first, but they remember what to do. Each strand of hair is tugged, wrapped, knotted. You've made dozens of these ropes before, each one slightly different, each one the same. Work like this is not done alone, not usually. A cousin joins you, her hair braided thick and wrapped around her head beneath a woolen cap. She doesn't speak much, but her presence steadies you. The two of you work in time, your breath making twin clouds in the frosty air. In Iceland, closeness matters, even silent closeness. Sometimes especially that. Mid-morning, someone brings word from the coast. The sea is calm. The boats will go out. It's not fishing season, not truly. But even a few good hauls of cod could change the coming month. You help prepare. Nets are checked, boats scrubbed of ice, wooden oars tested for cracks. Your role is not on the boat, but near the shore. There, the smokehouse waits. A squat, stone-lined hut where fish are cleaned, salted, and hung on racks. You scrub the boards with cold seawater. You check the salt pots. Your hands ache with cold, but you keep moving. Stillness is worse. There is no glamour in this work, but it is honest. It is necessary. And when the boats come back, with their slow, even strokes through the inlet, you help pull them ashore. Later, you sit by the drying racks. Fish hang like flags, silver and stiff. The air smells of brine and iron. A dog barks from the cliff path above. Somewhere, someone hums a low song, the kind that has no name, just rhythm. You think, then, about what it would be like to live elsewhere, to live where winter is shorter, where grain grows easily, where the ground does not split open with heat from deep beneath the earth. You imagine olive trees, sandals, cloaks that don't need fur linings. But those are stories, told by travelers or carried by ships that come to trade wool and ivory combs for metal pots and beads. Those places are distant, too distant to feel real. And even if they are real, they are not here. Here, the cold teaches you who you are. Not in suffering, but in repetition. There is pride in knowing how to light a fire in wind, in knowing which slope will thaw first, in knowing how to slaughter a sheep in silence, with reverence, wasting nothing. In the old sagas, strength is not just measured by battle. It is measured by steadiness, by memory, by hospitality, by the care of tools, by the quiet management of the hard days. That night there is a gathering at a neighbor's home. You walk in a group along the ridge, lamps in hand, cloaks pulled tight. From a distance, the turf house looks like part of the land itself, just a swell in the earth with smoke trailing upward from a low hole in the roof. Inside, it's warmer than expected. The hosts have built up the fire, and the smell of stew fills the space, lamb and seaweed, thickened with what barley could be spared. It is not a feast, but it is enough. You sit with others, shoulder to shoulder on a bench, steam curling from your bowl. The talk is quiet, stories are shared, and then someone begins a verse. It's a woman, older than most, her voice thin but clear. She tells of a woman who crossed the sea, bearing 2 children and nothing else. Of how she built her house by hand, of how the spirits in the land tested her with fire, with loss, with hunger. Of how she survived, of how her great-granddaughter still lives by that same fjord. The room is silent, not because the tale is new, but because it is known. And that makes it sacred. You close your eyes. The wind sighs at the door. The fire shifts. You are very still. This is not a land that cradles its people. It is a land that expects something from them, that they remember, that they endure, that they honor the balance between giving and taking. You sleep that night on straw, with the sound of slow breathing around you, the hush of fire, the echo of stories still lingering behind your eyes. You think about the visitors who come here now, centuries later. Historians, tourists, poets, sleepers. They look at the stone walls and say, how did they survive here? But you know, they survived because they had each other, because they kept fire lit, because they knew the land would not change for them. And so, they changed for the land. You hear the sea again. Not softly, not gently. This is not the hush of waves on a warm shore. This is Iceland's coast, where the sea churns like an old beast, restless and gray, where wind claws at the waves and salt settles into every crack of skin and wood. But today, you are not hauling fish or cutting peat. Today, you are listening to a story, to a saga, passed from one mouth to another, inked on calfskin in later years, but kept alive for centuries first, in voice. Spoken aloud, under sod roofs, near smoke holes and lamplight, when winter wrapped the world too tightly. The tale is old, but the man at its heart is older still in the imagination of Iceland. His name is Egil. Egil Skallagrimsson, son of a settler, born into feud, cursed with anger, blessed with words. He was a killer and a poet, a monster and a mourner, a figure not meant for easy judgment, but one made to be remembered. Imagine him as a child, born in the 10th century in the early days of Iceland's colonization, to a family both proud and feared. His father, Skallagrim, was a man of strength and few words, a blacksmith, a settler, a man who had fled Norway when the kingship grew too tight, when the air under Harald Fairhair's rule had become too close. The family had settled on the western coast of Iceland, near Borg, carving farmland from volcanic stone, raising livestock where forest once stood, building longhouses with driftwood and sod. Egil was different, not just in temperament, but in everything. He was a large boy, thick of limb and wide of brow. His eyes were dark and far-seeing, his mood volatile, quick to anger, quicker to act. And he spoke in verse, not in casual rhyme or schoolboy chant, but in full skaldic meter, complex, alliterative, sharp as a blade. He composed his first poem at the age of 3. Not 3 in the modern sense. There were no birthdays in early Iceland, but 3 winters old, as they counted it, barely walking steadily, barely tall enough to reach the stew pot, already speaking in full verse. It stunned the household, not just because it was rare, though it was, but because skaldic poetry was a discipline, a craft. It was the domain of the learned, the practiced, the courtly. And yet here was a child, growling words like an old wolf, with rhythm in his voice and memory in his bones. It was not seen as a gift, not entirely. It was a sign of strangeness, of fate, of danger. The stories say that he killed his first boy, another child near his own age, during a game, over a disagreement, over a perceived slight. The details are vague. The saga does not dwell. It simply states, Egil struck him with an axe. Not for drama, not to shock, but as a fact. As one would say, the wind rose in the east, or the sheep gave birth to twins. This is how the saga speaks. It does not justify. It does not weep. It records. And from that moment on, Egil was no longer just a boy. He was a figure to be watched, to be feared, to be remembered. He grew strong, fierce, and never quiet. Unlike his father, stoic, silent, shaped like the land, Egil burned hot and fast. He laughed loud, drank deeply, insulted quickly. But he was not foolish. He listened, he learned, he studied verse and meter as other boys studied swordplay, and in time, he wielded both with equal skill. He could kill with a blade, or with a stanza, and sometimes the wound left by the second took longer to heal. When he was still young, perhaps 15, perhaps 17, the sagas don't specify, he traveled abroad, as many Icelanders did, to Norway, to the courts of kings, to test his tongue and his sword beyond the edge of the island. And it is there that the saga truly begins. The sea crossing from Iceland to Norway is never simple. It's not long by today's standards, just a few days when the weather is kind. But the North Atlantic is rarely kind. Waves crest like mountains, the sky vanishes into gray mist, and even the most seasoned crew keeps their prayers tucked under their breath. But Eagle made the journey many times, first as a young man wild with purpose, later as a warrior, seasoned and sharp, and finally as an exile, old and full of songs that had outlived the men who'd wronged him. His first real trouble in Norway came, unsurprisingly, at a feast. The details, like much in saga literature, are both specific and dreamlike. There is a feast, a challenge, an insult, too much ale, a host too proud to ignore a slight, a guest too proud to offer apology. Egil, still barely grown, clashes with the men of King Eirik Bloodaxe, so named for both reputation and temperament. The king's court is lavish by Norse standards. Gold arm rings, silver-trimmed drinking horns, skalds whose songs are purchased by flattery and threat. But Egil does not flatter. He speaks plainly, too plainly, and when his words cut too close to the bone, he finds himself branded an outlaw, declared Fredlaus, without legal protection. To strike him would bring no penalty, to kill him, no fine. He becomes, in a single night, both poet and prey. But Egil does not flee. Not immediately. Instead, he does something only a skald would think to do. He composes a poem, not a short one, but a full drapa, an elaborate praise poem dedicated to King Eirik himself. Filled with intricate meter, ornate kennings, and subtle layers of meaning, it is a masterpiece of flattery. But not empty flattery, clever flattery. Flattery designed to reshape the king's view of Egil, without Egil ever truly conceding anything. And it works. The saga says that Eirik, impressed, perhaps even bewildered by the poem's skill, allows Egil to leave with his life. But not his peace. Never that. Egil's life, from then on, is a pattern. Conflict, exile, feasting, fighting, mourning, singing. He is a warrior, but not for glory. He fights because he must. Because the world is harsh and feuds long. Because to survive in Viking society, especially as a man so quick of tongue and temper, is to fight. He sails, he raids, he buries kin and burns halls. He writes verse in the middle of storm-tossed voyages, composing lines over the roar of wind and sail. Sometimes he fights for land, sometimes for honor, sometimes just to prove that he cannot be ignored. And always, he writes. There is one story, told in the old saga voice, spare and calm, of Egil during a sea crossing. A storm rises. The boat is lashed with wave and sleet. Crew begin to despair, to pray, to curse the gods. Egil? He composes a poem. He wraps himself in a soaked cloak, leans against the mast, and speaks aloud to no one in particular. The poem describes the storm, the anger of the sea gods, the defiance of the crew. It ends with a calm acceptance of death. But of course, they survive, and the poem lives on, passed down long after the boat and the storm and the sail have all disappeared.
But not all of Egil's stories are made of battle and bluster. Some, perhaps the most human, are quiet. And none is quieter or sadder than the tale of his son. Bodvar was his name, strong like his father, gentle too, some say, a boy of promise, not a warrior, not yet, but someone Egil loved fiercely. When Bodvar dies, some say of illness, others do not say, Egil is undone. The saga, which spends little time on emotion, becomes still for a moment. It tells us that Egil would not eat, would not drink, would not speak, that he wrapped himself in his cloak and sat in the dark for days, and then slowly, painfully, he composed. What he wrote is known as Sonatorek, the loss of a son. It is perhaps the first true poem of grief in the Norse world. It does not weep openly. Instead, it describes pain like a broken mast, like a ship adrift, like hands that once held weapons now emptied of strength. It blames the gods. It blames fate. It even blames himself. But it never begs. And by the end, it finds a kind of balance, a way forward. He writes, I shall not bear the heavy loss without complaint. Not stoic, not heroic, just honest. By the time Egil reached old age, his legend was already growing beyond him. He had fought in countless duels and skirmishes. He had been outlawed, pardoned, outlawed again. He had buried brothers and sons. He had stood before kings and refused to kneel. He had composed verses so skillful even his enemies were forced to listen. But by now, his limbs were stiff. His eyes, once keen, began to dim, and the fire that once made him fearsome burned lower, still hot, but quieter, banked by the years. He returned home to Borg, the place of his father, to the turf hall built near the fjord, with its thick walls and low roof. There he spent his final years, and the sagas say he did not go gently. Even old, Egil was difficult, blunt, sharp-tongued. He expected respect, but rarely offered it in return. And yet, his people cared for him. Not just because of fear, but because of memory. They remembered the boy who composed verse before his voice had fully deepened. The man who had stood against a king with only a poem in his hand. The father who had mourned openly when others stayed silent. Egil was not soft, but he was not hollow. His presence was heavy but familiar, like the stones in the walls, like the sea at the edge of the pasture, like the wind through the hall, always there. One story tells of his sight failing in the final winters. He could no longer read, no longer carve runes. And for a skald, a poet, a warrior of words, this was no small thing. So he did what Egil always did. He adapted. He dictated. Verse after verse, he called aloud to a servant, who scratched his words onto vellum. Not hurriedly, not carelessly. Each line was shaped, tested, and reshaped. Even in blindness, he demanded precision. Because poetry was not decoration. It was memory. It was law. It was the shield he had always carried, even when unarmed. Another tale says that in his final years he grew restless. He believed you should not die a soft death, that his end should come as his life had been, loud, defiant, memorable. So, he prepared for it. The story goes that he took 2 chests of silver, plunder from earlier raids, and rode out with them into the hills. He told no one where he would bury them, only that he would not return. But he did. empty-handed. Some say he dropped the chests into the waters near a waterfall, muttering curses to ward off any who might seek them. Others say he buried them in a cairn, somewhere known only to ravens and the wind. No one ever found them, but still, people looked. Even after his death, Egil's words lived. They were copied, memorized, carried across generations. Not just the poems of war and insult, but the verses of mourning, the songs of old age, the observations of a man who had seen too much and survived too long. He became a kind of measure of manhood, of poetry, of resistance. Skalds who came after him compared themselves to him. Kings spoke his name in caution. Icelanders told his tales with pride, though not always with affection. He was not easy to love, but he was impossible to ignore. And maybe that was enough.
In a land like Iceland, so cold, so quiet, so full of silence, Egil made sure his voice never vanished. He carved it into the air, into memory, into verse. Long after the bones beneath the turf were gone, Egil remained. Long after Egil's body returned to the earth, his words remained above it. They were repeated aloud at firesides and gatherings, passed from father to son, copied slowly by scribes in dimly lit monasteries centuries later, after Iceland had taken up the Christian cross and tucked its pagan memories into vellum and ink. Egil's saga was one of the first to be written down, and though it was composed by another hand, likely in the 13th century long after his death, it bears the unmistakable weight of someone who had truly lived. Not a myth, not a symbol, but a man. A difficult, furious, grieving, brilliant man. His saga does not seek to sanctify him. It does not smooth his edges. It does not excuse his temper. It does not hide his violence. Instead, it does something rarer. It lets him stand, in all his contradictions. A warrior who wrote verse, a poet who wielded blades, a man who was both deeply feared and deeply moved by loss. This, perhaps, is what makes his story endure. Not because Egil was noble, not because he was just, but because he was profoundly human. And in that humanity, we see reflected the old Icelandic world that birthed him. It was a world shaped by hardship, by isolation, by long winters and sudden death. A world where men and women made peace not through power, but through poetry. Where law was recited aloud, where insult was measured in meter, where memory itself was oral, fragile, precious, where silence was dangerous, and a voice, especially one as sharp and sure as Egil's, was armor. Today, when you visit Iceland, you may walk in the places Egil once knew. The valleys of Borgarfjörður, the old homestead sites tucked beneath quiet hills, the remains of a turf house, its outline faded into grass, a wooden beam, blackened and cracked, that may once have warmed a skald's back. You may hear the wind howl across the fjord, and wonder if it sounds any different than it did 1,000 years ago. It doesn't, not really. And perhaps, if you listen carefully enough, you can imagine the low sound of verse, carried on that same wind, not shouted, just spoken, steady, measured, as Egil might have spoken it. What do we do with men like Egil now? Men who killed without hesitation but wept for a son. Men whose pride nearly destroyed them, but whose poetry saved them in the eyes of enemies. We remember them, not to glorify, not to condemn, but to understand. Because history is not made only by saints and statesmen. Sometimes it's shaped by the furious, the fractured, the flame-hearted ones who leave behind more than wounds. They leave behind words. And in Iceland, words matter. They always have. A country with no castles, no gold-filled tombs, no ancient empires, but thousands of lines of verse, of memory, of men and women named, quoted, remembered. That is Iceland's greatest treasure, not hidden silver in a cairn, but song, story, saga. And Eagles is one of the oldest, one of the deepest, one of the ones that still breathes, even now. Now, imagine a field, wide and quiet, save for the wind weaving gently through the grass. A river bends nearby, its banks lined with scrubby trees and soft moss. Rocks stand upright here, not by accident, but by purpose, set to mark ground that matters. This is Thingvellir, the assembly plains. It is early summer now, the only time the people of Iceland can gather without snow blocking their paths or ice splitting the roads. The valleys are open, the daylight long, the land momentarily hospitable. And into this field they come, from every fjord and farmstead, on horses, with wagons, with children, carrying fish, wool, smoked meat, carrying grudges, carrying names. They have come to hold the thing. The thing is not a building. It is not walled. It is not roofed. It is not gilded or guarded. It is a space, a gathering, a ritual, old even in its own time. And though it might seem unassuming, just people standing in a circle, listening, it is among the most important institutions of early Iceland. For in this place, law is spoken aloud. Disputes are weighed, alliances formed, feuds settled, or escalated. It is, in the truest sense, a parliament, but one rooted not in paper or crown, but in presence. There are no kings in Iceland, no royal line, no throne, no absolute ruler. Instead there are goðir, chieftains, each with their own followers, their own standing. They gather here as equals in theory, but everyone knows who commands attention and who simply hopes not to be ignored. Each man speaks in turn, not with shouting, not with pomp, but with deliberate care. For in this world words are power, and the way you phrase a claim, the way you remember a contract, the way you name a witness, these things determine not just justice, but survival. At the heart of the thing stands a man called the Lagsögumaður, the law speaker. He is not a judge in the modern sense. He holds no gavel. He wears no robes. But he carries the entire law of Iceland in his mind. There are no books, no printed codes, only verse, only memory. Every year, at the Law Rock, he recites 1/3 of the legal code aloud, not as performance, but as preservation. It is how the law is kept alive. Not written, but spoken. Not bound by parchment, but by breath. And those who gather listen, not only for justice, but for reminder of what binds them, of what divides them, of what must not be forgotten. This is not an abstract process. It is intensely personal. A farmer accuses his neighbor of land encroachment. A woman seeks compensation for a dead son. A feud smolders beneath the surface of trade negotiations. A chieftain leverages support for a judgment by offering a marriage alliance. These are not stories written down in ink. They are lived, carried in the bodies of the people present. And sometimes, it comes to blood. The thing is not always peaceful. Sometimes, words fail. Sometimes, justice cannot wait. Sometimes, a man sees the face of his brother's killer across the field, and the old codes fall away. Then swords flash, axes are drawn, and the quiet grass of Thingvellir becomes a theater of blood. But even this has rules. There are wergilds, set amounts paid for injury or death. There are witnesses who swear oaths. There are boundaries beyond which violence cannot go. And when all else fails, exile remains. The ultimate Icelandic punishment. To be cast out, to lose protection, to wander, hunted, without clan or home. A man without the law is no man at all.
As the camp settles into its rhythm, Thingvellir becomes more than a gathering. It becomes a city, a temporary one, built not of stone or timber, but of tents, cloaks, and voices. People spread out over the plain, forming loose neighborhoods of kin and allegiance. Campsites dot the grassy ridges. Horses are tethered in clusters. Smoke rises from small fires where dried fish sizzles and barley porridge thickens in iron pots. At the center, the law rock waits. But the thing is not all about law, not exactly. It is as much about presence, about being seen, about being known. Because in a world where written documents are rare and kings are non-existent, a man's name is his legacy. And so, people come, to state their claims, to hear news, to strengthen old ties, to make new ones. There are weddings, sometimes planned, often strategic. A chieftain may offer his daughter's hand in return for support in a brewing legal case. A son might be promised to the family of a murdered man as compensation and a step toward ending a blood feud. The ceremonies are simple by modern standards. 2 families, a few witnesses, a statement of intent, an exchange of gifts, sometimes silver, sometimes livestock. But they carry weight. Because in Iceland, the web of family ties is the only real architecture of power, and each new bond redraws the map. There's trade, too. The plains are scattered with makeshift stalls, blankets laid on the ground, loaded with goods, fish from the northern coast, tallow candles from the south, imported beads from abroad, passed along trade routes that touch Norway, Ireland, even far-off Byzantium, wool cloaks, carved combs, bone needles, tanned hides. There is little currency in Iceland. Barter rules. And these trades are not just economic, they are social. To accept a poor bargain quietly may be seen as weakness. To drive too hard may suggest greed. To give freely might signal power or desperation. Everyone is watching. Everyone is remembering. And long after the goods are gone, the stories of how the trade was made will linger. Feasting happens each night, not in great halls, but around fires, among friends and allies. Some bring their own food, others are hosted. Generosity here is strategic, a way to build loyalty, to show standing. The meals are humble. Dried fish, boiled lamb, skyr, flatbread hardened from travel. Ale flows, though meat is rarer, a luxury brought in by ship when trade permits. And with the ale come stories. This is when the skalds speak. Not all are famous, not all are skilled, but poetry is expected, especially in gatherings like this. Verses praising chieftains, mocking enemies, honoring ancestors, whispering warnings. A well-timed poem can shift the mood of a camp. win favor, stoke a feud, heal one. And so they speak. Some slow and measured, their voices shaped by practice. Others wild and spontaneous, letting the meter find them as the words spill forward like water from a cracked horn. There is laughter, sometimes gasps, sometimes a stillness that follows a verse so sharp it leaves no room for breath. Sporchus. Sporchus.
The thing is not only law, it is theater, it is marketplace, it is marriage ground, it is stage, it is chessboard. Every gesture, every silence, every deal or toast or glance across the firelight, it all matters. Because everyone here will return home, and when they do, they will speak of who was clever, who was strong, who was generous, or petty, or cunning. And those stories will shape the year to come. As the sunlight stretches across the plain, the Law Rock becomes a focal point once again. People begin to gather, not hurriedly, not chaotically, but steadily. There is no bell, no trumpet, no command. Only the quiet rhythm of movement, the sense that it is time. Those who have business to bring before the assembly move toward the rock. Those who wish to observe follow. They stand on the grass. They wait. They listen. The law speaker takes his place. He does not rise above the crowd on a grand platform. There is no stage here. Only a stone, a basalt outcrop from the land itself, cracked and veined with centuries of ice. He stands with the weight of years behind his eyes. He is not young, not likely to be. Law in Iceland is a career not of ambition, but of trust. It takes decades to know every clause, every exception, every condition handed down from generation to generation. The law speaker must not simply recite, he must remember, he must understand. He opens with a portion of the Gragas, the Grey Goose laws, and the crowd is silent. He speaks in a measured, low voice. Not theatrical, not emotional, just steady, certain. The words are formulaic, phrased precisely the same way each year, each time, so that any deviation can be caught, corrected, remembered. It is not just a performance of tradition. It is a preservation of the law itself. Because if he speaks it wrongly and no one corrects him, the wrong version becomes the law. There is no other copy, no scroll, no bound volume. Only ears. Only tongues. Only memory. Now the disputes begin. Two men step forward. They are neighbors, farmers from the same fjord, their lands separated by a river that has recently shifted its course after a winter thaw. One claims the fertile strip of land newly revealed, the other insists it lies within his family's grazing rights. There are no maps, no surveyors, only testimony. Witnesses speak. Elders are asked what they recall of old markers, stones, cairns, trees now gone. The law speaker listens. He does not decide. The thing is not a court in the modern sense. There are no juries, but there is judgment, arrived at through consensus, debate, and the shared knowledge of custom. Sometimes the case is resolved on the spot. Sometimes it is postponed. Sometimes it is left open, carried forward to the next thing. Because justice, in Iceland, is not always quick, but it is deliberate. Another case is brought. A man stands alone. He accuses another of theft, a sheep taken in the night, 3 months past. He names the place, he names the time, he names the witnesses. The accused steps forward. He is younger, nervous, but composed. He denies the charge. He brings his witnesses. The testimonies do not match. Memories blur. Intentions are questioned. There is no confession, no clear evidence. Only oath against oath. And so, the ancient custom is invoked. Oath-taking. 12 men are called to swear on behalf of each party, 12 from each side, chosen not randomly, but based on standing, reputation, honor. They do not claim to know the truth. They only swear that they believe the one they stand for is telling it. And the side with the stronger oaths prevails.
It may seem fragile to rest a man's innocence on the word of others, to base land rights on memory, to allow verses spoken aloud to carry the weight of contracts. But in Iceland, that is the foundation of the law. Because paper burns, books decay, but stories, when woven carefully, endure. And the people here have learned, over generations, to treat speech not as decoration, but as architecture. The final days of the thing move slowly. There is no grand closing ceremony, no single voice to declare it finished, no loud fanfare. Rather, it winds down like a fire left to burn out on its own. The crowd thins, disputes settle or are postponed. Camps begin to fold, trade slows, and still some linger. The elder farmers, the chieftains with complicated loyalties, the women who manage alliances with quiet conversations behind tents. Because sometimes the most important business is done not at the law rock, but in whispers, by fires, by stew pots, by the river's edge. This is how fragile peace is made in Iceland. Not through dominion, not by royal decree, but through relationships, delicate threads spun between families, pulled taut across fjords and valleys. The chieftains gather in twos and threes, exchanging news and silence. They know that what isn't said now may become tomorrow's trouble. So they choose their words with care. Sometimes a feud is deferred, not ended, but delayed by a shared meal or a betrothal. Sometimes it is reignited by a phrase spoken too loud. Sometimes a single verse, one cleverly composed poem, can seal a bond or break one. A saga tells of a feud that simmered for 20 years. It began over a broken fence. It ended with exile, blood, and two families nearly ruined.
But it was not a sword that caused it to end. It was a marriage, arranged at the thing.
A granddaughter for a nephew. A joining of names. The witnesses signed no document. They simply stood, listened, swore oaths. And the feud, which had defined the lives of both families for a generation, was put to rest. Not forgiven, but ended. Enough, at least, for the work of living to resume. ... The law speaker performs his last duty of the year. He recites the closing laws, reminders about property boundaries, grazing rights, obligations to the poor. He repeats the rules about winter slaughter, trade obligations, and seasonal migration. None of it is new. But that is the point. The repetition is sacred. It is how the world is remembered. He steps down from the law rock. He says nothing more. And slowly, the plane empties. The journey home is long. People pack their bundles with care, folding wool cloaks, wrapping leftover bread, tightening the straps on their horses. The wind picks up again, as if the land itself is breathing out after the gathering. Children who had played among the rocks now ride silent beside their parents. Women with new rings on their fingers look to the horizon. Men glance back at the law rock one last time, knowing they may return in peace or in need. There is no music, no singing, just hoofbeats and the low sound of cartwheels on earth.
In the sagas, the thing is often a turning point. It is where betrayals unfold, where lovers are separated, where oaths are made and later broken. But in real life, the thing was also survival. It kept the island from fragmenting entirely. In a world of isolated farms, scattered valleys, and long winters, the thing was the moment Iceland became a single society, not unified by flag or monarch, but by memory, by voice, by standing together under an open sky and saying, "This is what we believe, this is who we are." And even now, the field remembers. You can still walk through Thingvellir. The stones are there. The river still flows. The wind still moves through the grass. There are no reenactments, no costumed performers, just space and silence. And, if you're still enough, the sense of something having happened here. Something ancient, something careful, something human. Imagine yourself stepping out of the wind. Your boots are damp, your wool cloak stiff with frost. The sky is darkening outside, though it is not yet late. Winter comes early in this part of the world, pressing the sun low, wrapping the island in a chill that clings to skin and bone. But inside the longhouse, it is warm. Not brightly lit, not grand, but warm. The air is thick with wood smoke and the soft, savory scent of lamb stew. Peat glows low in the hearth, tucked between blackened stones. Light flickers from oil lamps hung on wooden beams, their flames dancing against the thatch above. And around the room, voices murmur, slow, low, comfortable. You have arrived not in battle, not in law, but in rest. This is the end of the day, and it is time to feast. The longhouse is long and low, as the name suggests. It is made not from planks, but from turf, cut thick from the hillside, stacked over a timber frame. The walls are earthen, soft-edged and deeply insulating. They hold the heat and the scent of many winters. There are no windows, only a smoke hole above the hearth. Only the quiet breathing of flame. The interior is divided, but not strictly. Sleeping benches line the sides. Wooden chests hold wool, tools, and silver. There may be a loom in the corner, a carved post to mark the gods. A bundle of dried herbs tucked into the rafters. The household is gathered, not dressed for show, but wrapped in cloaks and shawls, soft from wear. The host wears a brooch of bronze. The matron pours ale from a clay jug. Children lean against elbows, drifting slowly into quiet. Dinner is not extravagant, but it is satisfying. A simple barley porridge thickened with milk. Salted fish, caught in summer and dried in the sea wind. Lamb stew, made rich with onions and whatever roots could be coaxed from the frozen soil before the frost set in. There is butter, and a dense dark bread, and a single pot of skyr, passed carefully down the bench. The ale is cloudy, sour, brewed in small batches from barley, juniper, or sometimes even birch bark. There is mead tonight too, just a little, a gift, perhaps from a guest, perhaps saved for the right kind of evening. It is sweet and golden, and served in carved horns that have passed through many hands. There is no hurry, no need for it. The meal moves slowly. Conversation drifts in and out like mist between hills. They speak of weather, of lambs born too early, of someone's uncle who broke his sled again, of a dream that lingered after waking,
of the fish run that was late this year. Not urgent things, just life. Just the rhythm of it. A rhythm measured not in hours, but in seasons. In days that begin in dark and end in darker. In hands that have mended nets and stirred the same pot 100 times before. And then, when the bowls are scraped clean and the children have gone quiet, the stories begin. Not with ceremony, not with introduction, simply someone speaks. The voice comes from somewhere near the hearth. It is not raised, not theatrical, just steady, old. It belongs to a man whose hair has thinned and grayed, though his eyes are still sharp. He is not a chieftain, not a skald, but people turn to listen all the same. He speaks of a journey, a ship pulled along the coast of Norway, a storm that came too fast, a rock hidden just beneath the surface. He tells of how the men worked in silence, of how the sail was torn, of how they waited for dawn without fire, cold to the marrow. It is not a story with heroes. There is no battle, no revenge, only survival. But the room is quiet, because the people here know the sea, and they know how easily it takes. And in the spaces between his words, they remember. After him, another story. This one from a woman, middle-aged, practical, with a woven band in her hair. She tells of a dream. A white fox in the snow. A woman in blue who said nothing, only pointed. A child's footprint on the roof. It's not a tale with a lesson, just a dream. But people murmur. Someone makes a sign against the unknown. Another says they've heard of such dreams before. No one mocks her, because dreams, like weather, like illness, like poetry, are part of life here. Not explained, just acknowledged. And then come the riddles. They pass from mouth to mouth, thrown like pebbles across a stream. What walks with no feet and sings with no tongue? What sleeps beneath the snow but wakes with fire? Some are old, some are new. Some make the children giggle, though they pretend not to care. Some make the elders nod, though they've heard them all before. Riddles are not for the answer. They're for the moment of stillness that follows. The moment where you lean just slightly forward, wondering. That hush before someone speaks. That is the real reward. The skald speaks next. His voice is lower, shaped by meter. It carries a rhythm that feels older than the room. He recites a stanza from an old saga, perhaps about Egil, perhaps about someone else whose name still echoes. The verse is tightly wound, filled with alliteration and metaphor. Not easy to follow, not meant to be. It is meant to be felt. The fire crackles, someone shifts their weight, and the skald continues. Each word placed with care, each breath held just a little longer than needed. When he finishes, no one claps. There is no applause here. Just the gentle sound of a bowl being moved. The creak of a bench. The soft exhale of someone who did not realize they were holding their breath. And slowly another voice begins. A joke this time. Something about a farmer and a goat. The details matter less than the delivery. It earns a quiet laugh. Then another. Then a ripple through the room, like wind across tall grass. And just like that, the mood shifts. Lighter, softer. The night is not yet over, but it is comfortable now. The stories will continue, like waves in a slow tide. Some are whispered, some spoken more boldly. A few are half-told, trails of thought that drift off into sleep or reflection. Others are returned to later, taken up again like a dropped thread, and finished with the satisfaction of memory restored. But as the night deepens, something subtle changes. The laughter softens, the jokes give way to questions, the mood settles, not solemn, but reverent. A woman stands. She carries a small bowl of herbs, dried juniper and sweet gale. She tosses a pinch onto the fire. It crackles gently, releasing a scent of smoke and spice that curls into the air. She offers no explanation. None is needed. It is simply her habit, an offering to the old gods, or perhaps to the house spirits, or perhaps to no one at all. Ritual in this world is often like that. Not loud, not explained, just done.
One man checks the roof beams,
Not for damage, but for the way they creak. He says it means snow tomorrow. Another nods. A third disagrees. The debate is quiet, but insistent. Each person certain their reading of the omen is correct. This too is part of the rhythm. The signs in wood and smoke, the symbols in dreams, the reading of bones, the shape of flames. There is no priest here, no single authority to pronounce what is and is not sacred. Instead, belief weaves itself through daily life, woven into the way bread is broken, the direction a blade is laid, the words said before sleep. Sacred, but never separate.
At the back of the hall, beside a post carved with faint figures, sits a small stone bowl. It is blackened with soot, its rim worn smooth. It holds nothing but a few burned twigs. Still, every person in the house glances at it, sooner or later. This is the Horg, a private altar, quiet and unadorned. It may belong to Thor, or to Freya, or to no god in particular, just the spirit of the house, the ancestors, the past. There is no sermon, but someone places a coin in the bowl. Another adds a carved bead. Nothing is said, no chant is sung, but the act lingers. Later, someone takes up a harp. It is small, worn, with only a few strings. She plucks them gently, not to perform, not for praise, just to give the room shape. A slow, meandering tune, not melodic exactly, but comforting. A sound to match the firelight, to carry the thoughts that no longer need speaking, to help the body slow. Outside, the wind brushes the turf walls. The snow has begun again. Inside, time drips softly, like water from a thawed eve, like breath on a sleeping child's cheek. No one speaks for a while. There is no need. The night is old now. The fire has sunk into glowing coals, its bright tongues of flame replaced by a steady orange heart that pulses gently beneath charred wood. Shadows shift across the timbered beams, no longer dancing, but drifting. Some of the household has already gone to their benches, not to rooms, there are no rooms, but to the long, shared platforms built into the walls of the hall. Covered in furs and cloaks, they settle in, shoulders close, breathing slowing. A child sighs in her sleep. A dog adjusts its paws. The harp lies quiet on its side, its strings still faintly warm from touch. This is not an ending, only a pause. In the quiet, you become aware of small sounds. The soft tap of a ladle against a pot, the sigh of wind above the smoke hole, a slow, rhythmic snore from the far corner, the rustle of fabric, smoothed over weary limbs, and in the midst of it, thought, memory. A story you heard earlier still lingers, its rhythm soothing, its words half repeated in your mind, A verse, recited by the skald, returns again, like a melody with no beginning. This is how it stays with you, not as fact, but as texture. The sagas were not meant to be read in solitude. They were meant to be heard, to live in the ears, the voice, the memory. And here, in this hall, they do. The household is not rich. No gold, no grand feasts, no marble columns or silk banners. But what it does have, it shares. Food, fire, story, and space. Hospitality is not a choice in Iceland. It is a law, both written and unwritten. To turn away a traveler is shameful. To fail to provide warmth is near to violence. Because everyone knows that tomorrow the roles might reverse. And in this land, where storms rise without warning and snow blinds without mercy, kindness is not softness. It is survival. And so each guest is fed, each child is wrapped in wool, each traveler is given a place to sleep, not out of charity, but out of understanding. Because what is shared now may be needed later, and because stories only live when passed on. You lie back now. The bench is hard, but the fur beneath you is thick. The smell of smoke clings to your hair. A slow warmth spreads through your limbs, not just from the fire, but from proximity, from being part of something, not as a hero, not as a legend, just as a person. Present, witnessing, belonging, and above you the rafters sigh, and beyond them, the Icelandic sky stretches, black, vast, scattered with stars that watched these same halls 1,000 years ago. Outside, the wind continues. It does not howl. It simply moves, through the grasses, over the hills, between the stones, and it carries, perhaps, the faintest echo of voices, verses, laughter, a name spoken softly and then forgotten again. This is what remains. Not monuments, not power, but warmth, memory, and the hush that comes after the last story is told. Imagine the island now, not a bustling place, not a land of cities or empires, just Iceland, cold, spare, stunning in its severity. A place where human life once pressed itself against the elements. Wind, snow, stone, silence, and made just enough space to endure. Not thrive, perhaps, in the way we often use the word, but endure nonetheless. And in that endurance, something rich was formed. You've seen its traces now, haven't you? In the smoke that clung to turf walls, in the hands that chopped fish and stirred stew and placed small gifts beside hearthstones, in the voice of a man who would rather die than bend his words, in the circle of men who gathered not to rule, but to speak. The people of early Iceland did not chase glory. They sought steadiness. They wanted the sheep to live through the storm, the children to grow strong, the winter to pass. And when the nights were long, when the fire was the only light and the snow pressed in against the walls, they told stories, not to entertain, but to remember, to explain, to connect. The skalds gave shape to memory. The law speaker gave voice to order. The thing gave space to justice. And the longhouse gave comfort, a quiet warmth, a place to stop, to breathe, to listen. In modern life, we often race toward comfort. We pursue ease with urgency. But for these early Icelanders, comfort was something slower, earned, layered like wool on skin.
It was the comfort of knowing your name would be remembered, of knowing that your story would be repeated, not perfectly perhaps, but with care, of sitting close enough to the fire to hear someone breathe beside you. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was enough. There is something else to carry with you too. The knowledge that none of it, was inevitable. That Iceland's survival, its poems, its law codes, its legends, all of it rested on people showing up, listening, remembering. They chose to speak the law aloud rather than carve it into stone. They chose to settle blood debts through marriage rather than sword, sometimes. They chose to build a society without kings, and in doing so, made something fragile and rare. A place where memory held power, and where your word, your voice, was everything. So tonight, dear dreamer, as you lie still, think of that wind across Thingvellir, the hush of breath after a verse well spoken, the creak of a timber roof over a shared bed of straw, the taste of salt-dried fish and barley cooked low and slow, the soft, steady rhythm of stories passing through lips and ears and hands. And know that even now, you are part of it. Because by listening, you have carried it forward. By imagining, you have kept it warm. By remembering, you have helped it live. And maybe, just maybe, that is what history is for. Good night, dear dreamer.